From a lead actor who refused to look his co-star in the eye, to a dictator who donated an entire army for extras, the making of Charlton Heston's epic adventure was stranger than fiction. Behind the medieval spectacle lay Hollywood grudges, blacklisted writers working in secret, and production mishaps that somehow created one of cinema's greatest epics. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about El Cid. Fact 1. Heston and Loren feuded so badly, he wouldn't look at her. When Charlton Heston and Sophia Loren were cast as the star-crossed lovers in El Cid, audiences expected to see passionate romance on screen, but behind the cameras, the two Hollywood legends could barely stand each other. The tension between them became so severe that Heston actively refused to make eye contact with Loren during their most intimate scenes, creating an awkward atmosphere that required multiple takes and endless patience from director Anthony Mann. The feud reportedly began on the very first day of filming when Loren arrived late to the set due to a costume change, immediately putting Heston in a foul mood. Known for his professional discipline and punctuality, Heston took this as a sign of disrespect and never quite forgave his co-star for what he saw as unprofessional behavior. The situation only worsened when word spread around the production that Loren was earning $1 million for her role, making her the first woman in Hollywood history to command such a salary for a single film. This news particularly stung Heston, who was being paid significantly less, despite being the film's title character and having recently won an Academy Award for Ben-Hur. During the romantic scenes that were supposed to showcase their passionate love affair, Mann found himself repeatedly asking Heston to look into Loren's eyes, but the actor simply couldn't bring himself to do it. Take after take, Heston would deliver his lines while gazing off into the distance or focusing on something just beyond Loren's shoulder. When pressed about his performance in the film's famous deathbed scene, Heston later claimed he was deliberately looking into the future rather than into the eyes of his supposed beloved wife. Years later, Heston admitted in interviews that he regretted his behavior during the production, acknowledging that he had been unprofessional and unfair to Loren, and wished he had been kinder and less stubborn toward his co-star throughout the difficult shoot. Fact 2. Sophia Loren made historic $1 million salary. Sophia Loren shattered Hollywood's glass ceiling when producer Samuel Bronston agreed to pay her $1 million for her role in El Cid, making her the first woman in cinema history to earn such an astronomical sum for a single film performance. This groundbreaking salary milestone came at a time when even the biggest male stars rarely commanded seven-figure paychecks, and it sent shockwaves through the entire film industry that would change how leading actresses negotiated their contracts for decades to come. Bronston's decision to offer Loren this unprecedented amount wasn't just about her talent, though her star power was undeniable after successful films like Two Women. The producer had calculated that securing Loren would please his Italian financial backers, who were contributing significant funding to the epic production, and her international appeal would help guarantee strong box office returns across European markets. Additionally, Loren's growing popularity meant that her name above the title would attract audiences who might not otherwise be interested in a medieval Spanish historical drama. The $1 million figure was kept relatively quiet during early production, but word eventually leaked to the cast and crew, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere on set. While Elizabeth Taylor had previously earned close to this amount for some of her films, Loren was officially recognized as crossing the $1 million threshold first. The salary disparity became a particular source of resentment for Charlton Heston, who, despite being the film's title character and having recently won an Academy Award, was earning considerably less than his female co-star. Bronston later acknowledged that paying Loren this amount was a calculated gamble that paid off handsomely, as her presence in the film helped El Cid achieve massive international success. The movie earned over $26 million worldwide, proving that investing in top-tier female talent could generate substantial returns. Loren's historic payday opened doors for future generations of actresses to demand equal compensation and established her as not just a talented performer, but also a savvy businesswoman who understood her market value. Fact 3. Michael Hordern played Heston's father. despite 12-year age gap. One of the most amusing casting decisions in El Cid involved British actor Michael Hordern being chosen to play Don Diego, the father of Charlton Heston's character Rodrigo, despite the fact that Hordern was only 12 years older than Heston in real life. This minimal age difference created a situation where audiences were supposed to believe that a man who could easily have been Heston's older brother was actually his patriarch, requiring some creative makeup work and acting choices to make the family relationship seem believable on screen. Hordern was born in 1921, while Heston came into the world in 1923, making their actual age gap remarkably small for a father-son dynamic in a major Hollywood production. The casting decision likely came down to Hordern's distinguished appearance and his ability to project the kind of noble, wise authority that the character of Don Diego required, rather than any consideration of realistic family resemblance or age-appropriate casting. The situation became even more interesting when considering that Hordern's naturally youthful appearance meant that the makeup department had to work overtime to age him appropriately for the role. They added gray streaks to his hair, deepened the lines around his eyes, and adjusted his posture to suggest the weight of years and experience that would befit the father of a legendary warrior. Meanwhile, Heston appeared in the film looking vigorous and relatively youthful, which only emphasized how close in age the two actors actually were. This type of casting was not uncommon in Hollywood epics of the 1960s, where character actors were often chosen more for their ability to embody a role's essence rather than for physical accuracy or realistic age relationships. Hordern's distinguished bearing and classical training made him perfect for conveying the dignity and wisdom of a noble Spanish father, even if biology suggested he was far too young for the part. The casting worked so well that few viewers at the time questioned the family relationship, testament to both actors' professional skills in selling the illusion. Fact 4. A red car accidentally appears in medieval Spain. In one of cinema's most embarrassing continuity errors, a tiny red automobile can be spotted driving through the Spanish countryside during a scene in El Cid that's supposed to take place in the 11th century, creating a jarring moment where modern technology accidentally invaded the carefully crafted medieval world. The mistake occurs during the final scene before the film's intermission, when Charlton Heston's character is saying goodbye to Sophia Loren and preparing to ride off with his followers into what should be an untouched historical landscape. The error happened because El Cid was filmed on location across various Spanish provinces, using real countryside and authentic medieval castles to create the epic's grand scope. While this approach gave the film an incredible sense of authenticity and visual splendor, it also meant that the production had less control over what appeared in the distant background of their shots. During this particular scene, the cameras were capturing a wide vista of the Spanish landscape to show the epic scale of El Cid's departure. But no one on the crew noticed that a small red car was making its way along a distant road that happened to be visible in the frame. The mistake is small enough that many viewers miss it entirely during their first viewing, especially since the car appears as just a tiny speck moving across the horizon. However, once sharp-eyed movie fans discovered the error and began pointing it out to others, it became one of those infamous movie mistakes that gets passed down from generation to generation of film enthusiasts. The red car has since become a beloved piece of movie trivia, representing the kind of innocent production oversight that was much more common in the days before digital technology allowed filmmakers to easily remove unwanted elements from their shots. This type of anachronistic mistake was particularly unfortunate for a film like El Cid, which had spent enormous amounts of money and effort to create an authentic medieval atmosphere, with thousands of handcrafted costumes, real castle locations, and meticulous attention to historical detail in every other aspect of the production. Fact 5. Orson Welles turned down villain role over Mask issue. Orson Welles was originally approached to play Ben Yusuf, the film's primary antagonist and leader of the invading North African forces. But the legendary actor and director refused the role when he discovered that his character would be wearing a mask for most of his screen time. Welles, who was known for his commanding screen presence and distinctive features, felt that hiding his face behind a mask would rob him of his most powerful acting tools and make his participation in the film essentially pointless from both an artistic and career perspective. The character of Ben Yusuf was designed as a menacing figure who concealed his identity behind an ornate battle mask, which fit perfectly with the film's portrayal of him as a mysterious and threatening force from across the Mediterranean. However, Welles understood that his value as an actor came largely from his expressive face, piercing eyes, and the way his physical presence could dominate a scene, none of which would be visible to audiences if he spent most of his performance hidden behind costume pieces. Welles was particularly frustrated because he desperately needed the money that the El Cid role would have provided, as he was constantly struggling to finance his own independent film projects during this period of his career. Despite his financial pressures, his artistic pride and practical understanding of what made him effective as a performer led him to walk away from what would have been a significant payday. The role eventually went to Czech actor Herbert Lom, who brought his own intensity to the character but lacked the international star power and distinctive screen presence that Welles would have provided. This decision reflected Welles's understanding of his own brand as a performer and his unwillingness to compromise his artistic identity, even when facing financial difficulties. Producer Samuel Bronston had hoped that casting Welles would add prestige and star power to the production, but he ultimately had to accept that the mask requirement made the collaboration impossible for an actor who relied so heavily on facial expressions and visual charisma. Fact 6. The epic duel took 31 hours to film. The famous trial by combat sequence between Charlton Heston and Christopher Rhodes at Belmonte Castle became one of the most elaborate and time-consuming fight scenes ever filmed, requiring 5 full days of shooting that generated 31 hours of raw combat footage before being edited down to just a few minutes of screen time. This extraordinary effort was directed by legendary stunt coordinator Yakima Canutt, who had previously worked on epic films like Ben-Hur and Spartacus, and who understood that creating realistic medieval combat required meticulous planning and countless takes to capture every angle and movement perfectly. Before filming could even begin, both Heston and Rhodes underwent a full month of intensive weapons training under stunt coordinator Enzo Musumeci Greco, learning the proper techniques for wielding medieval swords, maces, and shields while wearing heavy armor that weighed dozens of pounds. The actors had to master not only the choreographed fight moves, but also how to make their combat look authentic and dangerous while ensuring their safety throughout the demanding physical performance. The production shot an astounding 21,000 meters of film for this single sequence, which equals roughly 69,000 feet of footage, demonstrating the incredible attention to detail that director Anthony Mann and his crew brought to creating what many consider the greatest dramatization of medieval combat ever captured on film. The massive amount of footage was necessary because the scene required multiple camera angles, close-ups of facial expressions during the fight, wide shots showing the full scope of the combat, and numerous retakes to perfect the timing and intensity of each sword, clash, and defensive maneuver. The final edited sequence, which runs for only about 6 minutes in the completed film, represents just a tiny fraction of all the material that was shot, with the editors carefully selecting the most dramatic and visually compelling moments from those 31 hours of combat footage. The result was a breathtaking sequence that set the standard for realistic sword fighting in cinema and remains one of the most celebrated action scenes in film history. Fact 7. Blacklisted writer secretly rewrote entire script. Ben Barsman, a talented screenwriter who had been blacklisted during the McCarthy era for his alleged communist sympathies, secretly rewrote the entire screenplay for El Cid and worked completely behind the scenes for nearly 4 decades before finally receiving official credit in 1999. The situation began when Sophia Loren read the latest script draft just 2 days before filming was scheduled to start and declared herself completely unhappy with her dialogue, prompting director Anthony Mann to desperately search for someone who could quickly fix the problems. Loren specifically recommended hiring Barsman, who was living in exile in Europe after being driven out of Hollywood by the blacklist that had destroyed the careers of many writers, directors, and actors suspected of having leftist political views. Mann immediately flew Barsman to Rome, where he read the current screenplay and found it so poorly written that he considered it completely unusable for a major motion picture production. Working under intense time pressure with filming about to begin, Barsman obtained a copy of the 17th-century French play, Le Cid, by Pierre Corneille from the library at the French Embassy in Madrid, and used it as the foundation for writing an entirely new screenplay from scratch. Director Anthony Mann later told film critic Bertrand Tavernier in 1967 that not a single line from the original script by Philip Jordan remained in the final shooting script that Barsman had created. Because of the Hollywood blacklist, Barsman could not receive official screen credit for his work, and the film was released with Frederick Frank, Philip Jordan, and Bernard Gordon listed as the writers, even though Barsman had essentially written the entire movie. Producer Samuel Bronston quietly showed his appreciation by slipping Barsman a $50,000 bonus just before the film's premiere, and buying his wife Norma an expensive mink coat. The injustice was finally corrected in 1999, when Barsman's contribution was officially recognized and his name was added to the film's credits, restoring his rightful place in cinema history. Fact 8. Italian composer refused to adapt famous opera. Mario Nasimbene was originally hired to compose the musical score for El Cid because the film was partially financed by Italian investors, but the collaboration fell apart when producer Samuel Bronston insisted that Nasimbene adapt music from Jules Massenet's famous opera Le Cid rather than creating an original composition. Nasimbene, who was a respected composer in his own right with strong artistic principles, flatly refused Bronston's demand because he believed that simply borrowing music from an existing opera would compromise his creative integrity and result in a score that felt recycled rather than fresh and original. The disagreement created a significant problem for the production because Bronston had already promised his Italian financial backers that a native Italian composer would handle the music, which was part of the deal that helped secure their investment in the expensive epic. However, Bronston's vision for the film included incorporating recognizable classical themes that audiences might already associate with the El Cid story, and he felt that Massenet's opera provided the perfect musical foundation for achieving this goal. When Nasimbene walked away from the project, rather than compromise his artistic vision, Bronston was forced to find a replacement composer quickly, and he turned to Miklos Rosa, who had already proven his skill with epic film scores through his work on movies like Ben-Hur and King of Kings. Rosa agreed to take on the project, but convinced Bronston to abandon the idea of adapting Massenet's opera, instead pursuing an original score that would be specifically tailored to the film's unique dramatic needs and visual storytelling. The Italian financiers still insisted that Nasimbene receive some form of credit for their investment purposes, so Bronston worked out an unusual arrangement where Nasimbene's name would appear on the Italian prints of the film, while Rosa would be credited everywhere else. Rosa agreed to this compromise as long as Nasimbene made no claims for royalties and understood that his credit would only appear in Italy. This behind-the-scenes musical drama ultimately led to one of cinema's greatest epic scores when Rosa created his masterful original composition. Fact 9. Franco's fascist Spain provided 7,000 military extras. Spanish dictator Francisco Franco personally donated 1,700 trained soldiers from his national army, along with 500 mounted officers from Madrid's Municipal Honor Guard, to serve as extras in El Cid's massive battle sequences, providing producer Samuel Bronston with thousands of disciplined military personnel who could handle weapons and follow complex choreography without the usual training required for civilian extras. This unprecedented level of government support came about because Franco saw the film as an opportunity to promote Spain's historical glory and attract international tourism to his country, while also demonstrating his regime's ability to support major Hollywood productions. Franco's decision to provide military assistance was partly motivated by his personal admiration for the historical figure of El Cid, whom he viewed as a symbol of Spanish nationalism and Christian resistance against foreign invaders. The dictator apparently saw parallels between himself and the legendary warrior, both as leaders who claimed to be defending Spain against enemies and preserving traditional Spanish values against outside threats. The arrangement worked perfectly for Bronston's production needs because real soldiers already knew how to march in formation, handle weapons safely, and follow orders without confusion, which made filming the complex battle scenes much more efficient than it would have been with untrained actors. The Spanish military personnel also brought their own sense of discipline and authenticity to the combat sequences, helping create some of the most realistic and impressive battle scenes ever captured on film during the era before computer-generated imagery. This military support represented a significant cost savings for the production, as hiring and training thousands of civilian extras would have been enormously expensive and time-consuming. Franco's willingness to loan out his soldiers also demonstrated how eager his government was to court Hollywood productions and improve Spain's international image during a period when the country was still relatively isolated due to Franco's authoritarian rule. The collaboration between a fascist dictator and Hollywood producers created one of the strangest political partnerships in film history, resulting in epic battle scenes that featured real military precision. Fact 10. Producer was Leon Trotsky's nephew. Samuel Bronston, the ambitious producer behind El Cid and several other epic films of the 1960s, was the nephew of Leon Trotsky, one of the key figures in the Russian Revolution and a prominent leader in the early Soviet Union before his exile and eventual assassination. This remarkable family connection created one of the most ironic situations in Hollywood history, as Bronston found himself working closely with Francisco Franco's fascist Spanish government to produce his films, despite being related to one of communism's most famous theorists and revolutionaries. Bronston had been born in the Russian Empire before his family emigrated to the United States, where he eventually established himself as an independent film producer with grand ambitions for creating spectacular historical epics. His connection to Trotsky was not something he publicly emphasized during his career, particularly given the anti-communist sentiment that dominated Hollywood and American politics during the Cold War era, when his films were being made. The irony of Trotsky's nephew collaborating with Franco's regime became even more pronounced when considering that Franco had originally come to power during the Spanish Civil War by fighting against communist and socialist forces that would have been ideologically aligned with Trotsky's revolutionary beliefs. Franco's government provided not only military personnel and locations for El Cid, but also significant logistical support and cooperation that made the production possible on such an enormous scale. This unusual family history also added another layer of complexity to the already politically charged environment surrounding El Cid's production, which featured blacklisted screenwriters like Ben Barsman working secretly on the script while the film itself was being made with the full support of a fascist government. Bronston's ability to navigate these contradictory political relationships while maintaining his focus on creating spectacular entertainment demonstrated his skill as both a businessman and a diplomatic negotiator, who could separate his personal family history from his professional filmmaking ambitions. Fact 11. Over 30,000 costumes were handmade for production. The costume department for El Cid created an astounding 30,000 individual costumes and garments for the production, making it one of the most elaborate wardrobe undertakings in film history, and requiring teams of skilled craftspeople working for months to outfit everyone from the leading actors to the thousands of extras who filled the epic battle scenes. This massive costume operation was necessary because the film featured enormous crowd scenes with armies of soldiers, court attendants, peasants, and nobles, each requiring period-accurate clothing that would look authentic on camera and help transport audiences back to 11th century Spain. The most expensive single costume piece was an elaborate black and gold velvet robe created specifically for the character of King Alfonso, which was handcrafted by master tailors in Florence, Italy, using materials that were specially woven in Venice, according to traditional medieval techniques. This royal garment represented the pinnacle of the film's commitment to authenticity and luxury, with its rich fabrics and intricate gold embroidery designed to convey the power and wealth of Spanish royalty during the medieval period. The production also required specialized costumes for different types of characters, including elaborate armor for the knights and soldiers, flowing robes for the courtiers and nobles, simple peasant clothing for the common people, and distinctive garments for the Moorish characters that reflected the cultural differences between the Christian and Muslim populations of medieval Spain. Each costume had to be not only historically accurate, but also practical for the actors to wear during long days of filming, especially the heavy armor worn by Charlton Heston and other warriors during the combat sequences. The sheer scale of this costume operation required coordination between multiple workshops and suppliers across Spain and Italy, with different specialists handling armor, fabric garments, accessories, and decorative elements. The costume budget alone represented a significant portion of the film's total production costs, but producer Samuel Bronston believed that this attention to visual detail was essential for creating the epic scope and authentic medieval atmosphere that would make El Cid a memorable cinematic experience. Fact 12. Heston's sword, made by same Toledo foundry as real El Cid. Producer Samuel Bronston went to extraordinary lengths to ensure historical authenticity by having Charlton Heston's sword forged by the same Toledo foundry that had created the actual El Cid's legendary sword nearly 900 years earlier, creating a direct physical connection between the Hollywood production and the real medieval warrior whose story they were telling. This remarkable attention to detail meant that Heston was wielding a weapon crafted using the same traditional techniques and possibly even the same family of metalworkers who had served the historical Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar in the 11th century. Toledo, Spain, had been famous throughout Europe for producing the finest swords and blades since medieval times, with local craftsmen developing specialized techniques for creating steel that was both flexible and incredibly sharp, making Toledo weapons highly prized by knights and warriors across the continent. The city's sword-making tradition had been passed down through generations of master craftsmen, many of whom had maintained their family workshops for centuries, and continued using the same methods that had made Toledo blades legendary throughout the medieval world. The historical El Cid actually owned two famous swords during his lifetime, known as Tizona and Colada, both of which were forged in Toledo and became legendary weapons in their own right, with Tizona eventually becoming one of the most treasured possessions of the Spanish royal family. Tizona can still be seen today in the Army Museum in Madrid, where metallurgical analysis has confirmed that it was indeed crafted in Moorish Cordoba during the 11th century, though the testing could not definitively prove whether it was made from the famous Damascus steel. Bronston's decision to commission Heston's prop sword from the same foundry represented his obsession with historical accuracy and his willingness to spend extra money on details that most audiences would never notice but that added an authentic connection to the legendary figure being portrayed. This level of dedication to authenticity extended throughout the production, with Bronston consistently choosing historical accuracy over convenience whenever possible, even when it significantly increased the film's already enormous budget. Fact 13. JFK screened the film 3 times at White House. President John F. Kennedy was so captivated by El Cid that he arranged for the epic film to be screened 3 separate times at the White House during his presidency, making it one of the most frequently watched movies in the presidential residence during the early 1960s. This unusual level of presidential interest in a single Hollywood production suggests that Kennedy found something particularly compelling about the film's themes of leadership, honor, and political struggle, which may have resonated with his own experiences as a young leader navigating complex international tensions during the Cold War era. Kennedy was known for his appreciation of history and literature, and El Cid's portrayal of a noble leader trying to unite a divided country while facing external threats would have struck familiar chords for a president dealing with civil rights tensions at home and the Soviet threat abroad. The film's central character, Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, faced many of the same leadership challenges that Kennedy encountered in his own political career, including the need to balance competing interests, make difficult moral choices, and inspire others to follow a vision of unity and progress. The multiple White House screenings also reflected Kennedy's well-documented love of movies and his frequent use of the presidential screening room to entertain guests and unwind from the pressures of office. Kennedy often invited friends, family members, and political associates to join him for private movie screenings, and El Cid apparently made such a strong impression that he chose to share it with multiple different groups of viewers over the course of his presidency. The fact that a sitting American president found El Cid worthy of repeated viewings added to the film's prestige and cultural significance, demonstrating that its themes of leadership and sacrifice transcended mere entertainment to offer insights into the nature of political power and moral responsibility. Kennedy's enthusiasm for the film also highlighted how Hollywood epics of this era often carried deeper messages about contemporary issues, even when they were set in distant historical periods. Fact 14. Charlton Heston preferred William Wyler as director. Despite El Cid becoming a critical and commercial success that earned over $26 million worldwide, Charlton Heston later expressed reservations about the film in his 1995 autobiography, In the Arena, suggesting that the epic might have been even better if William Wyler had directed it instead of Anthony Mann. This surprising criticism came from an actor who had worked extensively with both directors and understood their different approaches to filmmaking. Having starred in Wyler's Academy Award-winning Ben-Hur just 2 years before taking on the role of El Cid, Heston's preference for Wyler stemmed from his belief that the veteran director had a superior ability to balance spectacular action sequences with intimate character development, something that Heston felt was crucial for making epic films emotionally engaging rather than just visually impressive. Wyler had proven his mastery of this balance in Ben-Hur, where he managed to create both breathtaking chariot races and deeply personal moments of spiritual transformation, earning multiple Academy Awards and establishing the template for successful historical epics. In contrast, Heston felt that Anthony Mann, while skilled at creating visually stunning action sequences and sweeping landscapes, was less effective at developing the emotional relationships between characters, particularly the central romance between El Cid and his wife, Jimena. Heston believed that Wyler's more character-focused approach might have strengthened the film's dramatic impact and made the love story more compelling for audiences. Interestingly, Heston also speculated in his autobiography that Ben-Hur might have benefited from Mann's direction instead of Wyler's, suggesting that he saw each director as having complementary strengths that might have been better suited to the other's project. When Heston mentioned this idea to Wyler years later, the director reportedly showed little interest in the suggestion, apparently satisfied with how both films had turned out. Heston's willingness to second-guess such successful productions demonstrated his ongoing commitment to analyzing his craft and considering how different creative choices might have improved even his most celebrated performances. Fact 15. Producer financed film through oil trading scheme. Samuel Bronston devised one of the most elaborate and unusual financing schemes in Hollywood history to fund El Cid, working as an oil broker who sold DuPont petroleum products to Spain and then converted the Spanish pesetas he received into movie production funding because the Spanish government was unable to pay for American goods using United States currency. This complex arrangement arose from Spain's economic isolation during the Franco era, when the country faced severe restrictions on international currency exchanges and had limited access to American dollars, forcing creative solutions for any major business transactions with foreign companies. Bronston recognized that Spain's currency problems could actually work to his advantage as a film producer, since the country was eager to attract international business and had resources like cheap labor, spectacular locations, and government cooperation that could benefit his productions. Rather than seeing Spain's economic limitations as obstacles, Bronston turned them into opportunities by positioning himself as a middleman who could help American companies do business with Spain while simultaneously building his own film empire. The oil trading operation required Braunston to maintain relationships with wealthy American families like the DuPonts and Rockefellers, who provided the petroleum products that Spain needed for its industrial development, while also establishing connections with Spanish government officials, who could facilitate the currency conversions and provide support for his film productions. This arrangement allowed Braunston to accumulate large amounts of Spanish currency that he could then invest in local film production costs like labor, locations, and equipment, which were much cheaper in Spain than they would have been in Hollywood. The scheme worked so successfully that Braunston was able to fund multiple epic productions in Spain, including King of Kings, El Cid, and later films like 55 Days at Peking and the Fall of the Roman Empire, essentially creating his own mini-studio system based on international currency arbitrage. However, the complex financial arrangements that made Braunston's success possible also contributed to his eventual downfall when the elaborate web of international deals became unsustainable and led to his bankruptcy in the mid-1960s.